Oh yeah, done. Oh yeah. That's a junk hole, so. Try what you must say, Roa. Tire my issue, the thing that Roa. Oh, Kawalani Rashi, you don't want you to call Pong down, Taba Taba Tong, Yam, Java Saba, Juro, so that she was chat. Chiwa Namla, Rashi Mena. Then a member to it, then a man I led on to it, now shall saw some member. Gundaji now shall saw some member in bed, and a drop a giver to a tea. Oh, drop a jet. That Kavalana, a Ranshinji, Don Yang, Tanya thing do, Tanya them do, and it Judan David now shall. Or short to by Yinzang, and it castle Java Seba. Java Seba, Tajin, the same book, you shoot. Constant to a shoe and I say, cause a shoe and I say, Tini Kella drew a Tawamali Chebuko, said, can't do soon at Chiwanam, Tanzi Chiwa Dan Chebas. What Chiwana Rashi to it, but Temba Cheba, then Dejin Java Yizang, Gujela Gia Shawore, Gujela Jena, Rashi, Tugu Mato, Rashi, Madrina, Gujela Java Sham, Mituba, the Trapake. That Kavala. Then a Shuma Yinzang, and a Shella Rabare, Shella Raba is a Shella Ramaleba, Kikoyova Yinzang, Tini Kella Joe and the Tawamali Jebu go, so I say, Tawamali Jebu gom, or that Castle Java Seba Qua Pomara, or Tabatoponia to Java Seba Duros, that do check, the Jinti check.
So then, at the last. Last part of the explanation then of verse 26, it says that that which terrifies childish persons, here the persons who are uneducated with respect to the nature of reality, emptiness, is that which actually eliminates a terror for the wise or the educated person who understands the nature of reality. This is explained, as we said earlier, that, or in the commentary it says here that the educated or wise person who properly understands reality knows that through by means of the fact that things are devoid or empty of intrinsic existence, this very fact enables one to get rid of samsara, to abandon samsara, and to achieve liberation. So they see that, and by seeing that it's this lack of intrinsic nature itself, emptiness of intrinsic nature itself, that frees them from samsara and enables them to attain liberation, their fear is actually eliminated by means of this same thing, emptiness, which terrifies those who are unfamiliar with it, who are childish with respect to it, or uneducated in it. So here, this is explained, as we mentioned earlier, in the Praise to Dependent Origination, the Essence of Good Explanations, that text, where it says that same exact statement is made there. J. Rinpoche has repeated basically the same point, which says that that emptiness of intrinsic existence, which terrifies those who misunderstand it, childish beings who are terrified of it because they think that for something to exist, it necessarily has to exist by means of its own intrinsic nature. They assume that if something exists at all, it necessarily must exist by means of its own intrinsic nature. And here, intrinsic nature refers to a kind of character of things which is not dependent upon other things, a nature or character of things that is not dependent upon others, things outside of the thing itself. So that kind of character, many people assume that if something is to exist, and if one is able to establish causal relationships, the relationship between a cause and an effect, then you have to do that by establishing that the cause and the effect both have sort of intrinsic nature or character, which is its own intrinsic property. And they assume that, and they assume likewise that without being able to establish the intrinsic identity or intrinsic nature of a thing, that you can't establish any kind of relationships with between things. You can't establish all of the conventional relationships that govern how causality and things in the world operate. Therefore, with that sort of misunderstanding, preconception that things must have intrinsic nature in order to exist at all, these childish, unlearned, or uneducated beings are terrified when they hear that things don't have intrinsic nature. They hear about emptiness and think that it entails the total non-existence of things like cause and effect and so forth. But likewise, here in the Praise to Dependent Origination, J. Rinpoche has explained that for the wise person or person who's intelligent and educated in emptiness, then that actually, this fact that things are devoid of intrinsic nature frees them from fear itself.
Oh, yeah, that Tabatang, and it Dantela Chua Tabasuba knees. Gigudin Maluba, Nanzimbala Chua Tang. I in then Gigula, Gigudini say you can do Kasala Kogu, so secure. Oh, can say Gigu said, Annie. Never let Pumbong, Suji Pumbo, Toy to ship Pumbo, to number ship Pumbo, never let Pumbong Ada. That you must see. Or you see, Dang Jevi, and a chill cooler diving. That do not dash Pumbola Tawashagora, what chill Guatella diving, and it give you sausage knees. Sausage din in Malubas. So give Maluba. Ngadang ayu timbala chunga sara chidang sina ngadang ayu singadala ani lo tundi ngatimbadang ani ngayi long jajala ngayu watimba se lo ni yonggu are teni lo tundi che dang ayu wa rawang tu badang ngayi long jaja ngayu wa lo ani rawang tu batimba ngadang ngajindang ngari timbi chikda se ya chikdam da o Ransi to what bit about. What is that? Give it in a Maluba, Nada, you at Timbala Chunga Tangs.
So here then the next verse explains, it shows how it is that fear that we've described above arises from the misapprehension of the self. And that's given in verse 27, where it says, all beings arise from fixation on self, or misapprehension of the self, such that they thereby are fixated or misapprehend mind. This is what has been stated by the one who speaks solely for the sake of beings. So the first two lines of this describe how it is that beings, and here beings refers to persons, living beings and so forth, persons who, and it says there that they arise entirely from this misconception of I, the wrong view of the I. Here, the commentary on this explains that or to finish the verse then, that the beings that possess this kind of misapprehension of the I and the misapprehension of the mind, this has been explained by the teacher, speaker, who is solely concerned with benefiting beings, that these beings actually arise from this misapprehension. So then from the misapprehension of I and mine. So here, this is explained in the commentary, that the 5 appropriated aggregates, so 5 appropriated aggregates here refers to the basis for the designation of an I or a mine, or I should say an I or a person, here referring to the physical aggregate of, say, the body, and then the aggregate or collection of sensations that a person experiences, and then all of the collection or aggregate of ideation, thoughts and so forth that people have, and then the aggregate of construction or creating factors, and then the various forms of consciousness that exist as components of the person. And then in addition to those 5 aggregates, there's the 4 elements, the material elements of earth, water, wind, and fire, and so forth. So together with those they're called 9 dharmas here, or nine, you could say, elements in this case. And upon that collection of 9 elements, the person is designated, or the living being is designated in dependence upon them. So that these ordinary living beings then, ordinary beings, arise from this misapprehension of the self, misapprehension of the I, and they arise from the misapprehension of mind. Here, we have to specify what is meant by misapprehension or misconception of the I or the mind. There's the way in which we conceive the I or conceive mind has sort of 2 dimensions. One is correct, actually. When we say I am this, or mine, this is mine, there's a way in which that is accords with reality. It's a understanding or cognition which is in accord with the way things actually are. It's a valid conventional designation. But if you go beyond that and you assume that the I exists in an autonomous way, or that the mind exists autonomously, has some kind of standalone nature, then that's what is being specified here as the misapprehension of the I or mind. Because there's a correct apprehension of I and mind, which needs to be separated from the misapprehension or misconception of the I and mind. So these beings then, ordinary beings, entirely arise from this misapprehension of I and mind.
Oh yeah, Anita, ngar simbatang, ngayiwat simba. Oh, any ngar simbatang ngayiwat simbi. Anita simba niwutin gule dembi. Kondo sheba ke, ani kiwu, sosa kiwu teta la, ani pemba, tachidu pemba sumbi, ani jabaki. 강서 최가를 해서 땡중 동바 땡지기 튼 어디 가서래 좀 된대지 아니 동바 땡중 같은데 숨바데 된다고 나다 가이와 진비지 아니 어때래 직다 대다단 dem비 소소 겨워 대다라 아니 다 가서래 팬비치도 숨바 타주도 팬배 숨비 자위 동바 땡중 같은라 나 된다디 가서래 짜바단 대바 짜바데 가래를 때는 중국어래서 다단 다기 왔지 말이야 왕그 중국어래서 다단 다기 와서 이게 생각이니까 나 세대 아니 가서래 되게 미바데 다단 다생 왔지 미바데 아니 타냐디 옆에 다지 샤고라는 레소바보다나 아니 제부 누가 보고 다지당 아니 롱제바보다 롱제자자고와 인상 아니 라시지 맞으나 아니 다 롱제바다 롱제바 제자당 어다 된좀 좀 못도 봐 인상 아니 다다다 그거 좀 발라 때네 아니 잡아디 테라테네 연구하래스 펜바 타지도 좀 봐서 좀 된데지 펜바 타지도 좀 봐대 땡지 저거 땡지 저봐 취지 진여 가서 왔던데 니라 잡죠. 태양양한 다지시 시주민제 철라미 수완하시 전에 타치도 숨비 제외 동반지 퇴라 지원난 잡아대 다다다가 좀 발에 되는 중고가래. 세다 돌지나.
So here, then why is it that this teaching on emptiness frightens childish beings? Here, what is called the misconception of I, or misconception of self, and the misconception of mine, or the misconception of that which pertains to myself, that which belongs to myself or is of myself. Here, these misconceptions come out of ordinary persons, ordinary beings who are here called childish and uneducated in this, are such because they're not able to understand that that they're sort of that they don't understand that the self or the I does exist conventionally, and one has to be able to establish it in order to, the self and the I must be established conventionally in order to be able to account for cause and effect, especially in terms of karma and the experiences that result from karma. Without having an I or a self, which conventionally exists, there's no way that one can posit or establish that in the future such an I or self which has created an action, has performed an action, will also in the future have to experience the results of that action. So this conventional I or self has to be validly we have to be able to establish it validly. But that in the case of the misconception of the I or the self, and that which belongs to I or self, there's an additional erroneous misconception which is mixed together with or overlaid on top of the correct, valid, conventional understanding of I and self. And this misconception of the I or self holds this conventional I or self as if it existed intrinsically, as if it possessed some kind of intrinsic nature or character, which it means it's not dependent upon other things. So that misconception of the self for ordinary beings, because ordinary beings who have not understood emptiness properly think that if the self doesn't exist or the I doesn't exist by means of its own intrinsic nature, then it would become completely non-existent. They think that when they hear emptiness, then they hear the word emptiness or the teaching on emptiness, that it would imply or entail that the I or the self is completely non-existent. They think that I'll become non-existent and so forth by hearing emptiness. So therefore, the teacher who has great compassion for living beings explains emptiness in terms of dependent origination. That is that he uses the meaning or takes emptiness in the sense of dependent origination as a means to dispel the fear of living beings that are terrified by this hearing emptiness and misinterpreting it through their misconception of the I and self.
Oh yeah. 다다다가 준비왕 그 총화당 시와노 콜라 초위 치도 동반이 순서 세고 다지다 댄데데비는 다다다 저기도와 댄데니나 태양양안 다시 냥알은 다와 대 코알라 초와 코와 방바기 아니 냥데 라오 치도 태양양안 다지 대 시주면제 쳐라메 소아나시 전에 아니다 코알라 초위 치도 동반이 순바래 댄주 동반마 댄데스다 동반이지 댄데 동반마 댄주 동비 텐도 순바데 어다 디선스나
라 댄주 동발라
댄
So here the Buddha, out of his compassion, has explained emptiness in the sense of dependent origination to show to beings that are terrified of emptiness the way to liberation. And he's explained that emptiness has this sense of dependent origination as a means for dispelling this kind of fear terror that ordinary living beings possess when they encounter this teaching on emptiness, and in order to show them the way to liberation, show them how it is that samsara arises out of by the force of this misapprehension of the self and that which belongs to the self, or the I and mine. The misapprehension of those gives rise to samsara, and that also one is liberated from samsara by means of understanding emptiness.
Oh yeah, that's dole sunzu dor demba de tian je chini. Dan dole sunzu jewa shaba tela. Ngada nga yiwa zimba druba je da zimba druba de la yang ngo da te ba be ani taba toba da je ge sabje xi yue be na ne da tambo te ba be ngo de tambo te ngo de la ngo de shaba tela tambo ngada nga yiwa zimba druba ngo de da di mai da.
So there's this leads into the next topic. That was a presentation of essentially the essence of how it's explained in the sutras by the Lord Buddha, and then the meaning of that is explained more extensively and there are multiple subdivisions of this extensive explanation. Showing that first there's the establishment that the misapprehension or misconception of I and mine is false, and then there's showing that bondage and liberation are negated or ceased by are devoid of any kind of intrinsic nature. And that all phenomena are free from the two extremes of permanence and annihilation, or eternalism and annihilationism, or all phenomena are free from those two extremes. So the first here has the establishment of the I and the misconception of I, establishing that the misconception of I and mine is false. That's the first topic, and that has again multiple subdivisions, topics. There's the actual discussion of this. There's the demonstration that by getting rid of this misconception of I and mine, one obtains liberation. And then there's an example that is given using the example of a reflected image, and then showing that understanding emptiness is the cause of liberation. So we've now arrived at the first of these topics, the actual explanation that which shows actual explanation of the meaning of the sutra, which was referenced above, which is in the first topic here, establishing that this misconception of I and mine is false.
Oh yeah, madang ayo zimba trupa ngoyete dayo dagu yeche wa se tegi dayo se dadan dayo dagu yeche wa se de karsungu are sana datajin dadan dagu wa madang ayo wa da jibare madang ayo wa sana ranjila jar da sana arashani gal jai bade rashani ga oh yendam da soso la jai na 다단 다그 예제와 세와 탄예도 다시 쉬와 나신 전에 마당 마이와니가 예봐 풍벌라 때네 때에 마당 마태기 애는 롱 제장 마이와니가 예장 어 된다위 마당 마이와니가 담비텐도 안에 다야메 마디안 다다다메 다기와메 아이와 태아 다기와메 다에 많이 다기메 담비텐도 타냐도 마당 아이와에 다다다기와 여장 된 담발 마당 아이와야메 다다다기와야메
So this is the explanation of this begins with the first two lines of verse 28, where it says, ultimately, the notions I exist and what is mine exists are false. as the rest of the verse continues, because from the perspective of knowing things as they truly are, there is neither I nor mine. So here, it says in the verse here, you can read this self or I. They're essentially synonymous here, and mine and that which pertains to the self are equivalent. So when we say I exist or mine exists, what we're referring to here, on the one hand, is the I. We have to distinguish between the conventional I, which does exist, and the I as it's misapprehended by the misconception of I. And in that second form of the I doesn't exist at all. It's completely non-existent. So we have to separate the two out. And the same thing applies to mine and so forth. There's a sense in which mine is a necessary convention. It's something that we have that exists and is the case. But then there's the second sense in which the mine, as it's grasped at or misconceived by the misconception that grasps at I or mine, is erroneous, is false. So the verse here says that I exist and mine exists. Here, I refers specifically to the I, which is designated based upon one's own, the components of one's own person, whereas mine refers to, it can include elements with portions of one's own person as well as other things outside of oneself. It subsumes both that which is portions of oneself as well as things that are outside of oneself. So both of these, you have to say, conventionally, I and mine exist. However, ultimately, the I and mine, which are held by the misapprehension of the self, or rather that from the ultimate perspective, it's the case that the I and mine, which are held to exist by the misconception of the I and mine, that I and mine do not exist in any way whatsoever. Those, so this sense of I and mine you have to distinguish between the conventionally existing I and mine and the I and mine as they are conceived by the misconception of I and mine. In the first case, the I and mine exist. The second case, the objects of those misconceptions don't exist at all.
Oh yeah, that ngadang ayiwa ngadang ayiwa dan dagiwa da kai chemunduwa o tanyedu yejang ane ten damba dadan dagiwa never da ten damba dadan dagiwa yejewa ngadang ayiwa ten damba yeba zimbate ane o kasore dini tambi tendu lo serigana ten damba yeba zimbate ane loba loba sheba chuwatang ane ti 강 진지 유 나당 아이와 태양 준바래 준바 인데 와고 괜찮은 관계 지나 다다 데려다 라시 마주발 주고 저한테 합도想不起나 아니 라시지 마주바 인장 전다바 마주바 인장 전다바 주와 준비 준바데 아니 로 추와다 아니 뒤유데 나당 아이 와데 나와다도 마주베 준바이래
So here, what the distinction then between the conventionally existing I and mine, and the totally non-existent I and mine, you have to specify the sense in which I and mine is that second case is non-existent. Here, it's when the misconception of I and mine grasps at I and mine as if it was ultimate, as if they were ultimately existent. So in the case, let's take the I, just as the example here. If one holds the I as if it was ultimately existent, ultimately existent here means existing by means of its own intrinsic nature. Then that supposed I, ultimately existent I, or the I existing by means of its own intrinsic nature, that sort of I is actually completely fictitious. It's non-existent, completely non-existent. And therefore, we can say that I itself is, we could say it's false, or it's mistaken, and it's untrue. Basically synonyms there. Or one can say, likewise, that the apprehension of that non-existent I is that misconception or apprehension of the I as being ultimately existent or existing by means of its own intrinsic nature. That misapprehension is also false, mistaken, and untrue. So here, the distinction is being made between the conventionally existing I, which does exist, and the apprehension of that, which is valid and correct, as opposed to the misapprehension or misconception of the I, which is holding it as existing in a way which it does not exist in any way whatsoever. So the one is correct and the other is mistaken and false.
Oh yeah, 다 강제 양다 지다와 용수시와 임미중 세리가라. 어텐더리 아니 전바데 추와다 전바 연바데 균생 관계 치나. 나당 아이와 랑신지 춤나. 아니 댐바 인고래. 랑신지 춤나 댐바 인고래. 댐바 이나 파바냠샤 이시기 신이시비 생활요 고고래. 신이시비 생활을 요요고 쓰고와라 양다바 치다와 응고수도 비 신이시비 생활을 아니 생활을 여나 가서래 라신지는 파바냠샤에서 신이시비 생활을 요고와라 양다바 치다와 또닝고수도 시비 시비 이시기 신이시비 생활을 나다 아유바니 미중아래 좋아 매요 미중아래서 매바래서 마스바래서 좋아 야.
So here, how the rest of the verse explains how we prove or establish that this explanation that's just been given is the case, that the I and the mine, which are grasped or misconceived by this misapprehension of the I and mine, that object of that misconception is non-existent, as well as, and the misconception itself is false, mistaken, and untrue. So the second half of the verse here says, the reason, because this is giving the reason for to prove the thesis here, because from the perspective of knowing things as they truly are, there is neither I nor mine. So here, what is being explained is that if the inherently existing or intrinsically existing I and mine actually did exist, then they would be perceived and they would be seen within the perspective of the Arya's gnosis, which understands reality, which understands the true nature of things. That Arya gnosis of the Aryas, sees directly the nature of things as it actually is, and within that special gnosis of direct perception, understanding that things are devoid of intrinsic nature, then within that gnosis, the I and mine, which is grasped at, misapprehended, misconceived by the misconception of I and mine, that I and mine doesn't appear to that gnosis at all. It's non-existent within the perspective of that Arya gnosis, which thoroughly understands through direct perception reality just as it is. Those two, the I and mine, which are the fictitious objects of the misconception of I and mine, those don't appear and they're not seen by that gnosis at all.
도도제 시와이나 아니 나다 나이와 덴바 추나 아 라신지 주나 덴바 추고래 덴바 추나 덴바 인고래 덴바 이나 나주다 내주 틈바 인고래 저 나주다 내주 틈바 인고래 인장 다 파배냠샤 이시 나주다 내주 틈바 이나 나다 나이와 나주 틈바 이나 아니 신이 인고래 나주다 나주 틈비 최대라 덴바 대라 천이마 돼요 말아 군조비나 나주다 내수 믿음바 전담 나주다 나주 틈바 나주 틈비 최대라 천이 인거인자 아니 파반냠샤 이시고 마다 가요와 요거와래 파반냠샤기 이시고 마다 가요와 요마레스 파반냠샤기 시응을 마다 가요와 매바데 천이레스 마다 마이바 매바 통화데 천이 통화레스 마동안에 통화 탐바고 군조비 체 패배냠샤 이시시 생활을 마동와데 통화 담바 천이 통화래.
So here, to explain this in more detail, is that within the perspective of this Arya gnosis, which understands reality just as it is, what appears in that gnosis is strictly reality itself. Nothing else appears within the perspective of that gnosis. So that which is known or cognized by that gnosis is just reality as such. And here, this excludes phenomenal things. Which phenomenal things are characterized as having a nature in which the way they appear and the way they exist is not concordant. That is, when we observe ordinary phenomenal things, they appear to us as if they were real, as if they existed from their own side, were established by means of their own intrinsic nature. Yet they don't possess that kind of nature. Therefore, phenomenal things are deceptive and erroneous insofar as appearing in a way that they don't actually exist. Now, as far as the object of the Arya's gnosis, which understands reality, that object is simply reality as such. And therefore, there's no disparity between the way it appears and the way it exists. This is the definition of ultimate reality, that it's the way it appears and the way it exists are in a complete accord. There's no difference between the way it exists and the way it appears. So here, the I and mine, which are the objects of the misapprehension of this I and mine, a misconception of I and mine, those objects don't appear to that Arya gnosis, and therefore they don't exist ultimately. They don't have any kind. They don't exist ultimately at all.
Oh yeah, that di nala do ma di yo di nyamsha ki singoro anu kunjo ku che ma dong me ba de me ba tong wa de me ba de ta chini za me ba tong wa de chini tong wa so do di ba nala yo su na mi don cho wa ta ja mi zong xi du xie tong wa me la san ba tong wa me so tong be xian ye jian ne ba ni wa me che le ga zhen da nyamsha ki singoro kunjo ku che me ba de 아니 텐다데바 돈이체 냠샤기 시용으로 천이세비 시용으로 군조 여바 주와데 주와 전바데 덴바진비 덴진 자고래
군조 예벌
군 남샤기 천이세비 시용으로 타냐비체 아니 나다 가이와 여바 전바데 덴진체
ngā yō 좀 봐.
냠샤 그 시원 하다 nga yo ba mo 아니 강사 yo ba 좀 바데 댄지 체 냠샤 그 시원 강사 매 바데 된다 된다 체
So here, if we're discussing then the aria's gnosis, and we're talking specifically here of the aria's gnosis, which is in meditative absorption on reality, within the perspective of that gnosis. Conventional things don't appear in any way whatsoever. There's no conventional things or phenomenal things in which there's a disparity between the appearance of the thing and the way the thing actually exists. So here, the fact that conventional things phenomenal things do not appear within that, within the perspective of that Arya gnosis, which is single-pointedly meditative absorption, absorbed in reality. The fact that those conventional things don't appear is evidence that I lost it. Sorry. 파페 냠샤 예식이
파파 냠샤 예식이 천이 시비 영어로 마당 아이와 여바 쯤바데 댄진체 마당 아이와 매바데 동바니
So if one holds that 파피 냠샤 예시
천이시 비시금으로서 파파 냠샤 예식이 뭐로 여바다 파파 냠샤 예식이 천이시 비싱으로 여바지 가가요.
그래서 춘이시 비싱으로 나도 나이 춘이시 비싱으로
춘이시 비싱으로 나다 나이와 뭐 근접고 최 여바데 여바 쯤바데 댄징 여바데 연나 여바 두고래 예 그봐
So here, one way we can look at things, conventional things or phenomenal things, and how they exist, is from the perspective of this Arya gnosis, which is absorbed in meditative absorption on reality. Now, within the perspective of that gnosis, these conventional or phenomenal things don't appear at all. They don't appear to it. Now, if they were to appear to it, these things would in fact exist as they appear. Why is that? Because within the perspective of that gnosis, that knowledge that understands reality, things necessarily exist as they appear. So if phenomenal things appeared to that gnosis, then they would necessarily exist as they appear, and therefore phenomenal things and conventional things would, if they existed as they appeared, they would be real. Their appearance and the way they exist would be in complete accord. So if they were to appear to that gnosis, they would be established as being real. And however, because that is not the case, we know that phenomenal things, when they're apprehended, they appear, or the apprehension of phenomenal things holds them to be real, to exist as they appear, when in fact they don't exist that way.
강의 된진 저와죠. 가바 매바 잼매바 채바 매바 다매바 오와 매바 좀 태대됨이 텐심이 저와 니시 세데 저와 니와 시와 세데 된중 가서 제보데 아니 파바 냠샤 이시 그 춘이 시비 싱어로 아니 대뉴 가서 그 저와 매발라 저와 냐와 시와 쓰거래.
So here, this is essentially saying this. This is saying exactly the same thing as what is said in the first verse of the Basic Wisdom, which is praising the Buddha as the teacher of dependent origination, which is free of cessation and free of arising, is separate. Dependent origination is separate from stoppage and from arising. It doesn't come and it doesn't go, and so forth. There are 8 qualities or 8 properties that are negated with respect to dependent origination. So the last of these is that it says that it's the total pacification of all conceptual elaborations. That dependent origination as the total pacification of all conceptual elaborations is referring here to this Arya's how reality appears within the perspective of the Arya's gnosis, which is absorbed in reality.
Oh yeah, that. 가서래 다단다고 예지 증바탄에 로지 추와 증바 인세데 증바 인바데 다tima 두고요 인바다 증바 인바데 주바라 유 다단다고 와데 증바탄 다단다고 와라 신지 추와 증바데 로 추와 인바 두야데라 대니 주바나 안진 레죠 풍보나 안진 테니 아니 텐도 지 되게 안진 레죠 풍보남 안진래 주의 풍범 안진의 미도 주의 풍범 가르잖아요 제발도 안진 칸에 제가 칸에 되는 주의 풍범 안진래 주의 풍범남 준바인데 셈 안진 되니 된담도 돼 된담바 맞추비 안진 대한 준바인데 말 준바 대한 준바인데 된담바 맞추비 된담바 맞추와라 안진 군접 안중과의 대한담바 맞주와 인장 안진 군접이是吧 안진의 군접 인장 대한담바 안진 대니 대한담바 맞주 시리세 대한담바 맞주바 인장 나냐 맞주바 인장 준바래 안진 양 준바이 안진기 강유 아니 미유 풍범 안 대양 준바이 是吧 다들라 들으선도와 준비실이 찹디 대부 관계 사변 준바티 대부 관계 사변데 준바 규대 준바티게 대부티 깨와야 담바시 깨스고 말해 준바께고 말했어. 그와 사변 준바기 대부 준바께고라 마도 사변 준바기 대부 담바시 깨스고 말해. 세발라 단다디 가서 관계 사변 준바티 깨와 담바 칼라식 세체 당보된 아주 내주 풍부나 안전 되니 텐도 주의세 되게 안전 내주 풍부 준바인 안 대양 준바인 안전 되니 준바인데 텐도데 텐다바 맞주바케스 텐다바 맞주비 준바인 비시레스와 다디 차와데 간에 두고래서나 대부 관계 사변 준바티 대부 관계 사변에서나 대부디 깨지기 준바티 대부 대바께와지 가라시디 아니 쓰고 말해 세라 관계 사변 준바티 대바께와 가라시
So then, in order to, we have to establish then the fact that that this misapprehension of I and misapprehension of the self, and that the I, specifically that the I and mine, which appear, these fictitious or supposed objects that appear to the misapprehension of I and mine, that those are actually unreal or false. Here we have to establish that, and so this is established in the following verse, which reads as follows. This is verse 29. And it says, the aggregates arise from fixation on I, or I'm translating this as misapprehension of I. Misapprehension of I is ultimately unreal. How then can there really be any production of that whose seed is unreal? That's the entire verse. And then, so the explanation of this is that the aggregates that arise from this misapprehension of I, one can say that the object of the misapprehension of I is false, and therefore the misapprehension of I itself, that awareness that misconceives the I, is also false and erroneous. And so, since the aggregates arise out of this misapprehension of the I, they're also false as well. So the verse then continues by saying that misapprehension of I, grasping and holding at the I in a way in which it doesn't actually exist, is in fact untrue. And then the reason here is given, or the analogy is given, that a result whose seed is unreal, how could the arising of that result be real? How could that be real? So the commentary here, I'm translating the word here, zumpa, as unreal at times and false at other times. And then dampa is being translated as true at times and real at other times, depending on the context. So here it's given in this reason establishing that the object of the misapprehension of I and mine are in fact unreal or are untrue, is given in the form of a proof statement or syllogism, in which it says that the subject here is the aggregates which arise from this misapprehension of I. And then the predicate is that they are, those aggregates themselves are unreal or false. And the reason is that the misapprehension of the I itself is in fact, or ultimately, is false or unreal, because it's not established by mean ultimately. It's not established ultimately. And then this reason which is given here serves to establish the thesis which is presented at the beginning, in that and by means of an analogy, which it says that any kind of effect or a result that has a seed which is unreal, then the arising of that result how could it possibly be real? It's impossible for that to be the case. If the seed is unreal, then how could an unreal seed give rise to a real effect? It's impossible. So then the end of that, it says that, and the reason for that is impossible is that when the cause itself is false or unreal, then it doesn't have the ability to generate an effect that is real.
Oh yeah. You jumpa la devu jumpa jiwi nuwa me bichiri. Penan zun se kira dushi jiwi kanla. Ani ngowi nesu da mitumba chi mewa la zun mewa sikirwa. Ngowi nesu da tumba mewa la demba mawa sikirwa. Aran dan namchidang. Dan di 단디 디 된주의 세대 덴바다 줌바 생각에 간지지라 속어래 sana 아니 가소래 나와다 마주바라 줌바 나와다 주바라 덴바스 단 나와다 주모스 지사제 가르래 sana 최대단테 유도 쉐바기 아니 유전做我的啦 然后 군조비 쳐 간제지 이나야 태 유도치비 요전달라 탄예비 참만도 자야 말이 와 탄예비 참마 뭐 탄예비 참마달라 나주라 아니 에 가소리 난 친제라 최저한테 난 친제라 라완도 주바다 라시 주바 다 난고고아래 시와라 아니 뭐 추위 레바 슈 친제라 소소 삼전유지 탄예비 참마달라 추위 레바 슈만도 매야 인장 난 친제라 라시 주바 난 라시 주바 나야我原来就来让新嘛主把印章准把都下过的。Yeah.
So here we have to discuss what is being referred to when we say true and false or real and unreal. Generally, it's the case that if we say someone in ordinary language, someone who says something which accords with the way things are, then that person is speaking the truth. They're explaining things as things really are. And then on the other hand, someone who, when someone says something which is not in accord with the way things actually are, the actual situation, then we say that's false, or it's not presenting the real situation. So these terms are used in just the conventional sense of true and false, or that something that exists in a way that is in accordance with the way it actually exists, it's real, and something that doesn't exist as it appears is unreal. We use the terms in that way. Now here, the word true and false, or real and unreal, are used particularly with respect to phenomenal things in general. When phenomenal things appear to us, that is, when they appear to conventional valid knowledge, the conventional valid knowledge understands phenomenal things accurately on one level. That is, it understands that this is this and that is that. Conventional valid knowledge is able to distinguish different conventional phenomena as in their particulars and so forth. However, whenever any kind of phenomenal thing appears to us, I should say, whenever any kind of phenomenal thing appears to conventional valid knowledge, that conventional valid knowledge understands the conventional, it understands the thing on a phenomenal level accurately, but the thing simultaneously appears to that conventional valid knowledge as if it existed by means of its own intrinsic nature, or as if it was established ultimately. And so in that respect, conventional valid knowledge, although it is correct with respect to the basic factual situation of phenomenal things, it is in error with respect to the final nature of things, and it perceives and understands phenomenal things erroneously on the level of how they actually exist, understanding how they actually exist, as opposed to the way they appear.
Oh yeah, that demba sena karase sena nawa da trup siade nawa da trup masu tsisade ani tonyong mosu to nyangsha na ba mi to be yishi tong yu de chu yu xian ge zuo de la ani tonyong mosu to be nyangsha na ba mi to be yishi nyangsha na ba mi to be yishi de ani mari ba da phaja ma khang ge ma le ba manru xie wa de ko la karan nang zai de dan nawa da zhu guo de 是吧？或者看说的可以，那当你那我看哪在的，那我都出国了的。现场可能那也得了，当你们都没现场，那我看是那我都出国有啊现场，安尼他 돈이라 파바냠샤 이시라 나와다 추바 인상 덴바 시가레 라 덴라와디 마리바다 티 강 파자 가는 게 말해봐 라 대인상 덴루게 나와 요사 대라 요하라 초진에 마리바다 피 파자 가는 게 레바지다 시와들 마리 레바 시와다 유지 전에 군족이 나와요 니조시 고고 말이 와 나 된다 되라 유생이 되는 머리 바닥을 내봐야 마슈 유정원의 군족이 나와야 매와 인상 된주 나야 말이
So here, we have to carefully look at the different kinds of knowledge that we're discussing here. Conventional valid knowledge, we're specifying here that this conventional valid knowledge is it's correct with respect to conventional things in their conventional nature. But because conventional valid knowledge, we're talking about ordinary beings here in particular, it's affected by the sort of propensity towards grasping at things as being real. That is, misapprehending things as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature or autonomously. So here, conventional valid knowledge is correct with respect to the conventional nature of things, but because of its being contaminated by or influenced by the misapprehension of things as being real, it misconceives the actual nature, the ultimate nature of things, and holds things to exist as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature, as if they were real in the sense of existing as they appear. Phenomenal things appear to that conventional knowledge as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic nature, although they don't actually exist that way. Now, turning to the if we talk about how is it that something is real or true, here if we can take as an example the arias gnosis, which is absorbed in reality in a single-pointed fashion in meditative absorption. And within that kind of gnosis, that special knowledge, the phenomenal things don't appear at all to it. As what is appearing is solely reality as such, and not sort of phenomenal things, but rather the final nature of things is appearing to that gnosis. So in that case, because that knowledge, that special kind of cognition, is not influenced by or affected by the misapprehension of things as being real, then it doesn't misconceive or misapprehend the object that appears to it. So in both cases, if we're talking about conventional valid knowledge as well as the arias gnosis, you have, in each case, you have the knowledge on the one hand and the object or objects that the knowledge is aware of. And so in the first case, the case of the conventional valid knowledge, there the conventional valid knowledge has one portion which is correct in that it understands conventional things, conventional phenomena as they actually are conventionally, but it misconceives those phenomena as if they were real, as if they existed as they appear, as if they were established by means of their own intrinsic nature. And so therefore, that kind of cognition, knowledge is mistaken on one level with respect to the objects that appear to it. In the case of the second case of the arias gnosis that's here single-pointedly absorbed in reality, In that case, the cognition itself, the knowledge, is not affected by any kind of contamination of the misconception that things are real, and the object that appears to it is also exists as it appears. Let me re-say that. The object that appears to it exists as it appears. Therefore, the object itself is real or true, and the cognition or knowledge is itself correct, is true in that, and not false or erroneous.
야. 그래서 거기에서 말이고 뭐서.
Do you get that? Does that make sense?
야, 아세다.
Okay. Okay. Die Papi Nyamshak bezigmol die Yul Tony Kran Yorva. Die Kunzop Marabes.
kunzo 말해 거의.
Kunzop
kunzo 말.
to Yopa Yorabes. Kunzop to Yopa Yorabes, ya Kunzop Yorabes.
그래. 코란 타냐도 요아래데. 돈이 여바르스 발 타냐도 여바디 요 말했어. 코란 타냐도 여바래데. 파베 남샤기 이시기 생고 타냐도 여바디 요 말했어. 돈이 타냐도 여바디 구조다 말했어.
라.
돈이 타냐도 여바래스. 돈이 연하야 타냐도 여바디 여쓰고 말해. 에라. 타냐도 여바디는 군조 요거래. 대디 고아 도바야 버리.
That's a good, very good kind of problem to have.
Very good. 나 천이 시비 생을 타냐도 여봐요. 타냐도 여봐 천이 시비 생을 매 스투스라고 그래.
Okay, yeah, you have to say here that the object that appears within the perspective of this Arya's gnosis, which is seeing reality, is as you said, emptiness. And that emptiness is, okay, now I have to be careful, exists conventionally. Okay, it exists conventionally. 타냐도
가르레에서나 천이 시비 생으로 타냐도 여봐요. 쓰고하데 가르레 천이 시비 생으로 돈이 여와리. 돈이 여봐야자 돈이 고라 타냐도 여봐래. 여봐 인자 천이 시비 생으로 타냐도 여봐요. 좋아. 천이 시비 생. 타냐도 여봐대 군조래. 타냐도 여봐 천이 시비 생으로 여 말이. This
is a tough point, but there's some tough questions here. But basically, one says that with that object that appears within the perspective of this Arya's gnosis that sees reality, that is emptiness, and emptiness conventionally exists. Emptiness is conventionally existent. 타냐도 요레스.
천이 시비 생을 타냐도 여봐 요거한테 가르쳐 돈이 요하러 와. 돈이 고랑 타냐도 여봐러 와. 좋아. 하고서. 어이나 천이 시비 생을 안에 타냐도 여봐요. 천이 시비 생을 여봐요. 좋아. 천이 시비 생을 타냐도 여봐요. 천이 시비 생을 여봐요. 자, 다 여봐 천이 시비 생을 여하래왜. 타냐도 여봐 천이 시비 생을 여하래 봐서는 여하 말을 여봐 군조 된 말이. 여봐 군조 된 말이 와. 여봐 전 말이 와.
Okay, this gets into a problem, a very crucial kind of question that emptiness exists conventionally, is a conventionally existent. So then that would lead you to say that emptiness, which is the object there of the gnosis, which understands sees reality, is conventionally existent. So therefore, that which is appearing to that gnosis, within the perspective of that gnosis, is if something exists, it necessarily is conventionally existent, right? And emptiness exists, and then therefore one's led into the direction of saying that now I'm lost. Yeah.
친이 다녀도 여발에 왜서나 여발에 말이
Yoris.
친이 다녀도 여발에 말이
Chuni 다니도
여발에 말이
Okay, then you're getting into a debate.
친이 여발에 말이
Does reality exist or not?
친이
It
여발에 와
exists. It exists.
친이 여발에 와 나 이제 친이 예배 여발 요거래
So then the existence.
제자 예배 지요래서 마이 예배 미예스고로 와
So then you have to say that the existence of that reality exists.
나 친이 예배 친이 여바 인상 친이 예배 여바 예스가 다니지 친이 시비 생활 친이 예배 친이 시비 생활 여바 예 친이 시비 생활 친이 예배 다녀도 여바 예 그래서 그래서 제가 다 여봤으나 군접으로 와 군접 담아.
So then this is the 옆에나 군접 담아.
여봐 이나 군접 담아 자꾸 말했대. 여봐 코랑 군접 담아라 와.
Okay.
됐어 와.
So then the problem, okay, this leads into the point that if something exists, then it's, now here we have to distinguish between conventionally existent and phenomenally existent. They're two different words that I like to distinguish for a special reason. And here, phenomenally existent, kunzop du yupa, this word kunzop means sort of like, has a connotation of phenomenal things appearing in a sort of dual and obscured sort of fashion. So we say if something, if existence is phenomenally existent.
그래서 나 여박 군조 인장 여박 군조래 타냐도 여박 군조래 타냐도 여바다 여박 군조 대바 인자 타냐도 여바 춘이시비 생활 요아 말이 군조 대와스 여바 춘이시비 생활 요아 말 군조 대와스 다 춘이시비 영어 여바 예스야 과 돈이 여배 아니 그 돈이 여바 인장 아니 돈 여바 예스고 사래. So
then the problem here is that if you say emptiness is conventionally existent, is established conventionally, then you might be led to think, well, it exists, and if something exists, it necessarily is phenomenally existent, and therefore one would say that this would then entail that since it exists at all, then one would be led in the direction of saying that if it exists within the perspective of this Arya's gnosis that understands reality, then it would sort of entail that things which are in a sort of this erroneous, phenomenal way of appearing would also exist within that kind of Arya's gnosis.
천이 예배 여바 주구래 마도 천이 예배 군조 예배 주고 말해 저거 말해 와 천이 예배 여바 주지 천이 여바라 와 천이 예배 군조 예배 주고 말해 돼 아니 군조 예배 주고 말해 와 타냐도 예배 군조 예배 주고 말해 천이 세비서
So here then the way one solves this problem is by saying that conventionally existent and phenomenally existent are not identical. They don't refer to the same, they don't subsume the same set. That is because here, let's say, emptiness is phenomenally existent, but it's not, I'm sorry, stop me right there. Emptiness is conventionally existent. It's established conventionally, but it's not phenomenally existent because it's not established. Emptiness exists as it appears, whereas things that are phenomenally existent don't exist in the way that they appear.
채시 여바당 타냐도 여바 채시 중에 춘이스비 중어 여와를 외서는 여 말을 군도된 바레스. 와 춘이스비 중어 타냐도 여바 여와를 봐서 여와래 여와가래서는 돈이 여자 돈이 고난 타냐도 여바래.
So here then the point is being that emptiness, you have to establish it conventionally. It exists conventionally. That's how one established its existence. If something exists, it necessarily exists conventionally. But it's not the case that emptiness is phenomenally existent, because things that are phenomenally existent, there's a disparity between the way they exist and the way they appear. So the two categories are not equally, don't have the same extension. Is that kind of clarifying it a little bit?
Is there a distinction between empty and emptiness?
That's a different question, actually. But actually, here, I mean, the distinction that we're making is between. So here, this object that appears to this gnosis that understands emptiness necessarily has to exist. Otherwise, if it doesn't exist, then there would be nothing for that gnosis to see whatsoever. But one can't say that, and one has to be able to establish that object conventionally, because that's the only way here to establish something. You have to do it conventionally. So, but one can't say that it's what I'm calling phenomenally existent. The translation of this term is extremely difficult, problematic. Kunzop has multiple connotations that are difficult to capture in a single English word, but so I'm using phenomenal usually for that. And but that implies that something is appearing in a way that it doesn't actually exist. So emptiness, when it appears, it exists as it appears to the proper cognition that knows it. It knows. So here you have to make that distinction so as to establish that emptiness does exist.
Oh yeah. That's your question.
Did that answer the question? Yeah, Tanyitu, I'm translating that as conventional, and kunzop as phenomenal. So these are two different terms that are not coextensive. They're not the same. They don't cover the same territory.
Oh yeah. That 태방배 시간라 나당 아이와 짐바 방배 안에 타바토바 땜바 세대라 풍부 대다를 미덴바 토는 가지 뽕아 출 풍부 대다 미덴바를 세간라 풍부 대다를 미덴바를 세 파배 냠샤 이시기 싱으로 신이심이 시온 미덴바 토네스 로 미덴바 가르를 파배 냠샤 이시 신이심이 싱으로 매발라 여바 짐바 로 싱은 매발라 여바 짐바 인자 미덴바 다 신나 되잖아 지고래 로 파바냠샤 이시 그 신이시비 싱으로 미덴바데 신이시비 싱으로 매바데 돈이체 대통에 아니 통신 공부 채와라 때네 나당 아이와 라시지 투와 준비 나당 아이와 짐바타 세가 완전히 직다 나를 준비 직다다 뽕 주라 대방 차지 가나 아니 다 사변나 제와 방와 인자 치니 동아지 풍분 주 완전당 아이와 준비 직다 도바 인장 녀몽 주바 인장 직다 도바 인장 티유꾼에 나와기 레도 레사바 레도바 인장 레디나미지 되고 동아지 풍분 뭐좀 민주신 아니 누구 방법에 안에 타바타바 주로 Yeah.
So then the next verse explains how it is that by abandoning that here, abandoning the misconception of the I and misconception of mind, that one is able to obtain liberation. So that's explained in verse 30. Seeing in this way that the aggregates are unreal, one forsakes the misconception of the I. And due to getting rid of the misconception of the I, the afflicted aggregates do not arise again. So the way this is explained then, just as we've said before, this is elaborated on in the commentary here, that by seeing that the aggregates are unreal in that way. Here one can read where it says in that way in the commentary, it means that within the perspective of that arianosis, which is seeing reality, these aggregates, which are phenomenal things that have there's a disparity between the way they exist and the way they appear. Within the perspective of that arianosis, observing reality, then those aggregates are unreal. They don't appear even to it because it sees just that which is real, that is emptiness within that perspective. So then having seen that in that way, and one is able then to get rid of, abandon the misconception that holds the I and mine as if they were established by means of their own intrinsic nature. That occurs from that seeing, actually, from seeing the unreality or the absence. Earlier, Rinpoche said that there's a statement in the sutras and so forth which says that not seeing is the best kind of seeing, and that's in reference specifically here to this arianosis that sees reality. It does not see the phenomenal things in which there's the disparity between the way they exist and the way they appear. It sees emptiness, the reality which exists as it appears. So by means of that seeing, then one gets rid of the misapprehension of I and mine, and by abandoning that, getting rid of that misapprehension of I and mine, then the aggregates, suffering aggregates, don't arise again. So what this refers to then is that one stops in creating the karma, which is the cause for the arising of the aggregates, and then likewise the aggregates themselves as the result of that karma cease, and one obtains then liberation, which is the elimination or abandonment of suffering and the origin of suffering.
Oh yeah. 누구마음에 타바 주로스. 니다 게장 타바 라. 간사다 본부 때문에도 또고 땜베 시간라. 다 간사게 단지 란지바 맨제게 간사게 단지 참은데 디루라 간사게 단지 라바. 인장 단지 네 가서래 타바라 단지 참모대 방과 단지 참모대야 간사라시 주와진바. 인장我看上让心的主要这边这帮点把主要这边这把的帮过来，看上我太帮把钱把那看上他碰不点没都到过我点呗，啊你看上个咱们他们的确实咱们他们你我的你让爸爸在那给他把托过我印章，他把托把那当成他们的人主印章，太帮过我印章，啊你哦你让爸爸讲，啊你咱们他们多把点把的总体。
So these lines, this verse, also shows that in order to attain liberation, that it's necessary. They clearly show that it's necessary that one realizes or understands and realizes the selflessness as it pertains to the person and the aggregates. And this shows that likewise that because it shows that, it indicates that Arya Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas also necessarily have to understand and to realize, I should say, directly, the two forms of selflessness, the selflessness of persons as well as the selflessness of phenomena. Some other systems of Buddhist philosophy hold that it's adequate to understand simply selflessness in the absence of a self, in the sense of a self-sufficient, autonomous self, that the person is empty of having a self-sufficient, autonomous self. However, in this system here, that's considered merely to be a coarse level of selflessness, which in realization or understanding of that is not sufficient to affect any kind of liberation, any of the different forms of liberation at all. Rather, these subtle forms of selflessness, the absence of a self which is established by means of its own intrinsic nature, and the fact that the aggregates as well, the person and as well as the aggregates are empty of having a nature which is established, by means of intrinsic nature. That subtle form of selflessness is indispensable in order to achieve any kind of liberation, even that of the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha. And this is also indicates that these subtle forms of selflessness are counted among the obscurations, which are mental afflictions in terms of the overall system of the path.
Oh yeah, that teacher la, yeram papa ki, tama ye chamo toko wa sawa damba te, bei kwen duwe de la, tini sunyan ji bei sheba la, kansa da pumbo deme do tebe, dugun dobi jenju bedang, dobi bede ni se kana, da dugun dobi jenju bede la, deme do tebe dugun dobi jenju bede la, da chida melon dene su rangxin sunyan na meji, tene yangda nyudu ni junsa janya yue ma yin, wada di kaso re, melon la dene, ane sunyan jaya de, uma juba la suwa de jiba chija de, kaso re, chida de ni sunyan so dong la, chida de ni sunyan so dong la, xewa te yin, namba jeju dar, melon da chesin choba la dene, ane melon na go chesin ji sunyan nang girwa, melon la go chesin sunyan nang jang, melon na do chesin neba, melon ge na do chesin ge dongba, dong jang chesin ge sunyan nang wa nang xin. di tian yin zang, qita melon dene sui rangxin sunyan na me ni, teni yang da ni du ni, jun sa jiang me si ka la, nang wa da tu, ane melon na du che xin sunyan, nang wa da tu, melon na du che xin sunyan, nang wa tu ma zhu pa re. Uma ju pe de da da zhe di.
So here then, next, this is established. What has been presented above is established by means of examples, and an example. The example here is a reflected image is given for the example here. There are two examples here. A concordant, or the example showing. It's called a concordant example and an example of the contrary that'll be presented in sequence. The first here is the example that's concordant, and that shows that by realizing the selflessness of the person and the aggregates, that all of that suffering and sources of suffering, origin of suffering, are gotten rid of. So the first of these is given, this example is given in verse 31, where it says, depending upon a mirror, the reflection of one's face is seen, but it does not ultimately exist at all, or exist in reality at all, one can say here. So it's to go through the verse again, that says, although it is the case that one's own face appears as a reflected image in dependence upon the mirror, that it doesn't exist in any way whatsoever in reality. Here, that is referring to the face being in the mirror. Now, this verse here is exactly repeated, or the intention here is repeated in the introduction to the middle way work as well. The same example is used and the same explanation is given. Here, when we have our face and we have a mirror, then a reflected image of the face appears in the mirror. However, one's face is not in the mirror in any way whatsoever. Rather, the reflected image appears as if it was one's own actual face. It has that appearance, but there's a discordance or disparity between the way the thing appears and the way it actually exists. That is, the reflected image appears as one's face, has that appearance, but it's not one's own face. One's face is not in the mirror. So this shows that, and then the commentary on this explains that just as in dependence upon a mirror, that a reflected image of one's own face appears within that mirror, that occurs. However, that reflected image itself, in reality, it doesn't exist as it is not in any way whatsoever in reality established as it appears.
Oh yeah. 대신 풍부한데 완전 반이 몇 주로 세가라. 아니 가서래 대신 오 탐제 대신 오 탐제 또나야 또니 달라라도 제와 주로 세가 대신도 풍부라서 오 남장 완전히 매우 아니 매우지 매우랑 그 천이지 주와 나야 아랑 그 천이지 주배 동바래 소년요 이자 가서래 정한정반이 묘바주의 랑그 신지 소년신 세리가라 소년 체신도 멜롱그 나근 체신기 소년 체신도 나양 아니 체신 양다반이도 매번 나신 체니 시당용 오원나 라시지 가사가 풍보라서요 오원나 라시지 주바 나양 라시지 주바 가야 매바.
So then it says, then the next verse,
앉아서
대신 풍부 남는 때네. 말씀 반에
풍부 남라 때냐 말씀 반에 묘바 교양 세자 라시지 주와 묘바 교양 아니 체시 소년지 소년 체시 소년도 나야 소년도 마주바 가서 체시도 마주바 좀바 대신도 풍부라서 오 남자 라시지 주바 뭐 양다반이도 나나야 가사를 풍부 라시지 주바 말이.
So then the next verse explains the example here in more detail, explains the intention of the example here, saying that likewise, depending on the aggregates, the misapprehension or misconception of the I is perceived or occurs. But that I does not exist in reality or truly, just like the reflection of one's face, a reflected image of one's face. So to go through this verse again and the commentary on it, it says, likewise, in dependence upon the aggregates, this misconception of the I is observed or exists or occurs. Just like the reflected image of one's own face, it doesn't exist in reality in any way whatsoever. And then the commentary here explains the same thing again. Likewise, in dependence upon the aggregates, here that's saying that when we observe the aggregates, the components that make us up as a person, and also external things as well, they appear to us as if they existed intrinsically by means of their own intrinsic nature. Or another way of saying this is as if things possessed intrinsic identity That is, they existed by means of some kind of intrinsic identity. And so based upon that appearance, then we if we take the aggregates that make up the person as the basis here, they appear to us as if they existed by means of their own intrinsic identity or possessed some kind of intrinsic existence. However, and so based on that appearance, then we misapprehend them as the I. We hold to the I, and that misapprehension of the I comes into existence or is observed, and so this is false. Actually, this misconception or misapprehension is false. Just like the reflected image of one's own face in the mirror, it appears as if it was a real face, but it's not. It's simply an image or reflected image, and in reality, the person as well as the aggregates are not established by intrinsic nature in any way whatsoever.
Oh yeah, that the tendu shedi gala tendu na se zawa de ge jawa tu ma chi tendu na shedan de ksha ko de kade re se na da chesin ge sunya na yo wang xie tang nga da phumbo na yo wang xie ni wo de ani 我从到我们给小队这干了，我的碰不，点都对那位吃了出奖，我的碰不那位吃了没住噻。虽然前些对那位吃了出奖，虽然那位吃了没住啊，可能落地给那出没住给吃你有了小狗儿嘞。我听着没说吧，但虽然前些对那位往些得了，虽然给吃他们家呢，前些对那哇，我的碰不。 라시지 주와 나위 차텔라양 나다 품보 차탐전에 라시지 주와 나와. 와, 오 라시 차탐전에 라시지 주와 나양 라시지 맞주바. 수년기 차탐전에 제시도 나양 안에 제시도 맞주바. 콜람 만두위 차조서 중세자면에.
주타 오마라.
시와 찍라 有了处于恰着设计的，满足于恰着是你让就把买这个都给我的。本来顺着安排我是所那有，我看啥的碰不那位，写完台了，看啥的碰不，让个才你出那位吃了出我的，看是电路的那位吃了出我的，看啥的碰不那位吃了满足我的，吃你些。 苏年那月吃了个啦，苏年那月往前得了样，苏年前心都那月吃了出我的，苏年扩大那月吃了没出我的，吃你吃，是吧？但谈究了特别没吧？苏年前心都那月往前得了个，苏年吃他们家呢，前心都那玩蛮多，前心都蛮娘嘛，跟苏年是占的没吧？看啥的碰不上，但不出那月吃了样，吃他们家呢，但不出那玩蛮多，安尼。 만주에 줘서 그 차탐는 매 봐. 어 대다도 나와다 마주바다 디셰고 와래.
So here So here then the question arises or the issue arises of how do we interpret this example of the reflected image of one's face in the mirror? There, if we examine the reflection and we consider how it is that appears, in some systems of Buddhist philosophy, they make the distinction between the reflected image appearing as a face and the reflected image appearing as a reflection. And they would say, they could say that with respect that from the perspective of, let's say like a visual perception of the reflected image, that in some systems of Buddhist philosophy, they would say that with respect to the reflected image, there's a portion of the perception of that image that is in error because it perceives the image as a face. But then there's another portion of the cognition or perception which is not in error because it understands the reflection as a reflection. And by means of that sort of interpretation of the example, then, these lower schools of philosophy, such as the Swatantrika, Madhyamika, and so forth, would say that there's sort of differences within when we're knowing something, that there's a portion of our knowledge which is not in error. Or let me restate that in the case, they would interpret the example in that way, saying that if we apply the example then to the way in which our cognitions, both perception and conceptual cognitions or knowledge of things, there's a portion of our cognitions which are erroneous in that they misapprehend things as being real. But then there's another sort of part or portion of the cognition which is not erroneous because it perceives things as they actually are. It perceives the actual state of the actual object as what it is. Now, here in the Prasangika system, this kind of interpretation of the example is not accepted because we would, in the Prasangika system, we would say that in all respects, the things appear to our ordinary perceptions and conceptions as if they existed by means of intrinsic nature or by means of intrinsic identity, so that in all respects, and this applies both to our perceptions, sense perceptions, vision and so forth, as well as the conceptual knowledge. In all respects, these cognitions are affected by this misapprehension of things as existing by means of intrinsic nature or existing by means of intrinsic identity.
Oh yeah. Sunya Nawata Madruba Toy, Sunya Cheshin do Nayan, Cheshin de Madruba Toy, Gala Tongangi, Lotiki, Sunya Cheshin do Naya, Cheshin de Madruba Toba Zamgi, Sunya Nawata Madruba To, Rama, To Shagori. Ani Kansada Pomora Nawata Madruba Toa La, Ani or never do Kansada Pomorang, Tani to Nawata Madruba Togor, the Matua Nawata Mato. 대인자 가르레사나 아니 가사도 본보랑 천이 주어 준비 전바 태기 나주라 차지 추주 레벨방 나주 매바체 단다 전바 량제데 봐 신발라 차지 추주 라바든데 다 차지 추주 출당 차지 추주 레벨 단단디 최신의 소녀 최신도 나요 왕셰데 차지 추주 레벨 셰바 인장 아니 차지 투지 레비 셰와 되게 나주다 말마 차지 투주 아니 레비 왕기 멜롱도 최신 나와 인장 멜롱 수냐 최신도 나야 최신도 나와 맞주바 또와 잠지 수냐 나와다 맞주바 또是吧 다 가사다 풍보다 오데 아니 라제도 제도 주 나와다 맞주바 또와 따지 가사다 풍보 나와다 맞주바 또 그거 말이 되라 가르레사 나주 차쇼 라시 주와 나와다 맞주바 또거래.
So here then in the explication of this example, there are further differences between this system, the Prasangika system, and other systems of Buddhist philosophy. But if we turn then, how does this example apply to the way in which we misconceive things as existing by means of their own intrinsic nature or by means of intrinsic identity? Here, in the case of the perception of the face in the mirror, that is, here you're perceiving the reflection as if it was an actual face. Now, in that case, that kind of perception is clearly mistaken, and it's affected by a sort of a temporary form of a cause of error. The misidentification of the face, of the reflection as a face. That kind of misconception or misperception of the reflected image as a face can be eliminated simply by means of correct understanding that that reflected image is not an actual face. Once you understand that, then that portion of the cognition of the reflected image is removed. You no longer hold that reflected image as if it was an actual face, although it still appears to your perception there as if it was an actual face. You've come to understand that that isn't an actual face. Now, this, however, is something that you can come to an understanding of that simply by ordinary kinds of knowledge, basic, everyday kinds of reasoning and understanding. When one turns, however, to the misconception of the eye, in which the eye appears as if it was established by means of its own intrinsic existence or established by intrinsic identity, then it requires a deeper kind of understanding and reasoning in order to eliminate that. Here, that kind of misunderstanding is the result of some kind of extremely deeply embedded source of error within the mind, and that can only be removed by the appropriate kind of agent that will eliminate that sort of error from the mind. So what this entails then is that the sort of understanding of selflessness, which is posited by other non-Buddhist philosophers, saying that the person is devoid of a self-sufficient, autonomous self. That you can understand that, and but that type of understanding does not affect and does not remove the real deepest level of misconception of the I or self, which holds the I or self as being intrinsically existent or established by means of its own intrinsic identity. Because that level of understanding, the absence of self or I, the understanding the absence of, or non-existence of a autonomous or self-sufficient I or self, is at a much coarser level of analysis and understanding than the type of understanding one needs in order to eliminate the misconception of the self, which holds it as being intrinsically existing or existing by means of intrinsic identity.
Oh yeah, today in that sunya nawa da matubani, met kasare, chasing sunya chasing do nayang, chasing do matruade, and toala. 최신지 소년 덴버 나와다 마주바 또 먹고 인상 최신지 소년 나와다 마주바데 안에 겸보 달라 차와 그 타녀비 그 타마가 무슨 또 떠녀와 좋아 어제 또 뉴와 인상 텐자와데 최신지 소년 나와다 마주바데 리시 찾아 가양 마인바 개와 커지기 안에 리시라바 된거 와르데 리시에서나 담에 찾아도 가사지를 샤고 이세와지를 샤고 와르 좋아 이제 대도 아마 가지기를 시라바시 되바니 미대바 시와 차오 어디다 리시에서 다 가소리 리시라바 말에 리시 참아 말에 대탄 달라 참이 가사기야 아니 소녀 최신도 나와다 맞죠 또와 인자 소녀 나와다 맞죠 또와래
So here, now if we turn back to the example of the reflected image, which appears like a face, being able to establish that's not a real face, that the reflected image is not an actual face. This is something which any educated adult can understand by means of just ordinary conventional forms of valid perception. So everyone is anybody, an adult who understands things in an ordinary way can understand that directly with their own perception. And that kind of, however, some previous scholars used to or said that the understanding that the reflected image is not a real face is sort of a rough level of the reasoning awareness, the understanding of reality by means of reasoning. However, that is not really acceptable because this kind of everyday understanding that a reflected image is not an actual face is something that any educated adult can know, and therefore it doesn't fall. It's neither a coarse form of under the reasoning awareness. The reasoning awareness referring to an awareness that has investigated reality, ultimate reality, nor is it, of course, the subtle form of that reasoning awareness either.
Yeah, that's
We'll stop there then.
Nirana Mendala Gani Adayami Sanju Senju Rembo Maji Bana